For the last 10 years, I've been working as hard as I possibly can towards my goal, my dream of becoming a feature film writer and director and a TV drama writer and director. Last summer, I made quite a big leap forward in that journey. And that was because I got the chance to pitch an original TV series to studio companies around the world, including Bron, Film Nation, Kudos. For the first time in my life, I found myself sat having conversations with people who can actually make my dream a reality. So you're probably wondering, did I manage to get my show commissioned? Well, the short answer is no, but the long answer is something great came off the back of it. I'll explain exactly what that is a bit later, but I thought it'd be good to give you some advice in case you ever get to the situation where you want to pitch your show or feature film to a company. I'm going to explain how it works, what I experienced and what I learned, and how you can maximize your chances of getting your idea off the ground. And this probably applies to any form of business or idea that you want to get off the ground and wanting to get funding for. But obviously, I'm going to be talking about the industry of TV and film. Now, in case you somehow missed the memo, the series that I was pitching is something called Sunrise Meets Sunset. The whole story takes place in the 1960s, and the main person of that story is a jazz musician. Now, I didn't write this specifically thinking I'm going to go get it made. I'm going to be pitching this as my first show. I just wanted to write my first long form piece of content. And that's often what you do if you want to become a writer-director. You have to prove yourself by creating a spec script. So normally when you're an experienced writer, you're well established in the industry, you don't actually have to have the script before you start pitching. You just pitch the idea and then you'll work with a production company together to create that script before you then go and pitch it to different broadcast channels to try and get it picked up. But if you're a new writer, then you have to be writing that first script to actually prove that you can do it. So I just wrote the story that I'd want to see. I didn't think about the cost or the scale of it. I just wrote the story I wanted to see. By doing that, I managed to write a script that won the Best UK TV Pilot Screenplay from Film Market Hub last year. And that's what landed me the opportunity to pitch my script. So the way that you can get into the room is normally either through an agent, but getting an agent is a whole other battle, or knowing someone in the industry. Like any industry, it's about your networks and actually having those relationships. And 3 is winning a script contest. And that's how I got my shot. But the flip side of that is when I actually had the chance to pitch this, suddenly I was pitching this massive idea set in the 60s. And that was a problem. Let me tell you why. Here's a first piece of advice. If you want to get your first story off the ground, you have to create something that is realistic in terms of budget and scope. So if you write anything set in the past, the budget implication is massive. For a producer, they're thinking of this as a business as much as an art form. So if they see a story set in the 1940s, or if they see a story set today, one is going to be drastically cheaper than the other. And that comes down to production design, costumes, props like cars, and even it's not just about what you put in, it's about what you have to take out, making sure that there are no digital billboards in shot. And I'm pretty sure that applies for the future as well. I would guess that it's cheaper to make something set in the future than the past, but either way, if you can do it in the present day, you're going to have a much better chance of getting it off the ground. So that was the biggest lesson that I learned, because that means that now, as I'm writing my first feature, I'm setting it within a small, affordable world that is modern, current day. My personal advice is to have both, to have your ideal idea, but also have your realistic one. So let's say you've written your story, it's set in the modern day, and you've won a contest or you've managed to wrangle yourself into a pitching position. What you need to do is prepare as hard as you can, and that comes down into 3 areas. That is assets, research, and practice. So in terms of assets, they'll be expecting a few things. They'll want the script, but also the series Bible, which is basically a document that tells people everything about your world. So it's the characters, the themes, the context. And the benefit of that is not just for them, but it helps you define your idea in a bit more context. And again, even if you're not making a film, having those assets, it's almost like a business plan in a way, or your branding. It's building that picture in your head to have better clarity, and that makes more sense for everyone else so they can more easily imagine what you can see. And what's amazing is there are some top quality ones just available online. So you can find the series Bible for Stranger Things or for New Girl. Now, to do your series Bible, you're going to have researched at least the context of what you are trying to make a project about. But there is more research that you have to be aware of. So who are the people you're pitching to? What company do they work for? What have they made? But more than that, just a general awareness about what is being made. Who are the actors, who are the competitors. There is no way that you will be able to be as in the know as they are, because obviously they're working in that field day in, day out. But the closer you can get to being on their level, the more they're going to feel like they can build a relationship with you. There was this one moment when I was pitching where it became clear quite early on that he wasn't very interested in the idea, but he said, "What else have you got?" And I started telling him about this other idea I'd had. And his response was, "Oh, like this show over here." And I didn't know that. I didn't know this other show existed. From that point on, you're a little bit like, okay, well, now I'm an idiot. So you want to avoid those moments by being as aware as you can. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take a lot of work, but it's going to save you a lot of embarrassment in the room. Something that kept coming up, which I really just didn't even think about, was this idea of distribution. I mean, as far as I was concerned, as a writer, that's kind of not my area. That's the tail end of production. But when you stop and think about it, these companies, they're not interested in fulfilling your creative need. They're interested in fulfilling their audience's wants. And each company has a different target audience, and you have to know who that is for these companies. You have to be aware where these companies are positioning themselves and where you see your story. Does it fit into that? Do you as a writer fit into the audience's wants? So I was asked probably by about 50% of the people who I was talking to, where do you see this being shown? Is it a BBC show? Is it a Sky show? Is it Netflix? What regions is it? Is it Asia, Europe, America? Who is the target audience? Who do you think will engage with this story and why? Those sorts of questions, it may sound simple, may seem obvious, but actually you don't necessarily think about it when you are in the creative stage. Even though I had been researching these companies, I hadn't necessarily researched where all of their shows played and, what regions and who's the target audience. So the better research you can do about the end point, the more chance you have at the start point. And to add to that, just practice. So the way it worked for me is I was doing 12 or 13 different pitches in one day, all on Zoom calls, and they were kind of one-to-one, 15-20 minute calls. So before the day, I practiced with 3 friends who very kindly gave me their time, and we just pretended, as role play. They were the production company, I was the writer-director. And it helped me get comfortable with the environment, but it also threw up some questions I hadn't thought about and made me think a bit harder about how am I going to get this idea across. Now the next thing, and this is the reason that despite the fact I didn't manage to get my idea commissioned, which to be honest I wasn't expecting to anyway, I came out of this whole process with quite a successful endpoint. So when you are pitching, you have to think about what is your goal, and your goal may be to sell your idea. But for me, my main goal was to come away with at least one good connection that I could come back to with more ideas. Now, when you think of your mindset like that, you focus on building a rapport rather than going in and feeling like you need to sell. You're focusing on the human aspect. You might feel very aware that you have a finite amount of time and worry that if you don't start selling your idea straight away, you're not going to get the chance. And, at the end of it, they'll be like, "Oh, we didn't talk about your idea." That's not going to happen. These people will ask you about your idea. So you need to relax and actually think about how can I first off make them excited to even hear the idea and make them remember me as much as the story. Because these people are not just looking for your script or your business. They want to know, can they work with you for 3 years, for 5 years? Do they want to recommend you to other people? So focusing on building a rapport is, you have to do it. And now that is what has led me to having 2 really good contacts that, fingers crossed, when I have written my feature film, I will be able to go to and possibly get it commissioned. There's a relationship there, there's an amount of trust and respect, and there's the open door. And particularly when you don't have an agent like me, that gateway is so much more important to try and keep there. You might be thinking you don't know how to build a rapport. Well, what I would do is initially, maybe if there was something in the room of interest, I would talk about that. So I'd be like, oh, I love that poster on the back of your wall. What's that from? Or if there was some other kind of shared connection you could bring for both myself and the people on the other side, it was the first time doing it in a Zoom format. So just kind of talking about that and, what the experience had been like for everyone. You're not going to get that with everyone. Some people are going to be very to the point, and in those situations, don't try to steer them away from that. If that's who they want to be, then just go with it. But at the same time, don't feel like you have to settle to live in those worlds. If you don't like someone, you don't have to work with them. So it's not just about building a rapport. It's about making sure that you are comfortable with the relationship that might blossom. So build a great rapport if you can, and if you can't, don't worry, that probably says more about them than you. And that kind of leads on to the next point. Don't overtalk. It sounds really simple, but when there's that kind of pause where no one's saying anything, you want to fill it. Don't do that, because they will ask you questions, and they're probably thinking about your story, what they're hearing, and they want to ask you questions. And if you allow them, or even if you ask them questions as well, they're engaged in this conversation, they're interacting, and they're more likely to remember the exchange. Now, most of the questions I were asked were kind of things I'd prepared for, so I wasn't too fazed by any of them. But there was one company, I think they were the same company that made The Bodyguard, and their questions that they asked me were so intelligent that I just hadn't anticipated. And by pausing and allowing them to ask those questions, it made me think a little bit more about my idea. Would I prefer them not to have asked those questions? Of course, it would have been easier for me. But actually, when you kind of allow them to, and when you stop talking, you get more from it than you think. Otherwise, the day goes by and you've just spoken, you've not learned. So create those opportunities to learn as well. Now, no matter how well you prepare for these situations, it's not always going to go well. There will be times where people are just not interested for whatever reason. Maybe that they already have a show similar, they just don't buy that sort of material, or perhaps they just, don't really vibe with the story you're telling. In those moments, you have to be able to pivot, which means having a kind of a backup story, another idea. It doesn't have to be fully fleshed out. You don't have to have a full script, but having something to pivot to in those moments. You'll have to know quite early on, it will become pretty obvious that they're not really very interested. And your ability to adapt, to be flexible, to show that you have more to you than this one idea of yours is gonna add strength to you as a person. And again, they're not just looking at the idea, they're looking at the person behind the idea. Now, whilst my dream is to be a writer-director, something you should know if you don't, is that in feature films, that's a lot easier, that's a lot more expected in terms of when you're new. So if you're pitching an idea as a writer and director, you're more likely to get that choice. Whereas in TV, it tends to be separated. Well, it pretty much always is, where you can be the writer, you can be the creator, but they won't trust you to direct it. Or you may be the director, but they don't really want your input on the writing. That's because TV obviously goes on so much more. They bring in different directors throughout the seasons. If you want to direct a main TV show, even your own TV show, then you'll have to have directed some back-end episodes of other shows on some strange channels to prove that you can do it. You're never going to get that chance, or very, very rarely, to direct the first episode of a show you've written if you're new to the industry. Even if you've, like me, I've directed plenty of commercials, short films, etc. But I've not directed a TV episode that is 30 minutes long. And because of that, I'm not going to get the chance for my own project off the bat. And I know you might be thinking, well, it's a chicken and the egg. How do you get the experience without the experience? So the way they normally get that first opportunity is through representation. So they make a short film that does really well somewhere, let's say gets BAFTA shortlisted. From that point, they get represented, and those agents will help them get that small directing job somewhere. So for me on this, I was pitching mostly just as a writer, but I was also explaining that I am a director. I would love to be involved in that process at some point, but it wasn't a sword I was going to fall on. If a company is interested in the show, I'd very happily write it and be involved in the writing, maybe get to direct some episodes in season 2. Whereas a feature film, I'm going to write and direct that. That's going to be like a red line, for me. That is my chance to prove myself. But for TV, different game. And the final bit of advice, which was going to sound so obvious, but is be kind, be genuine, and be honest. And there will be times where they're talking about things that you don't know. Don't pretend that you do, because if you get caught out, then you've got the representation of being a liar, and no one wants to work with a liar. If you don't know something, it's better to be ignorant, and then it gives you the chance to prove yourself the next time you talk to them, than to be a liar. Equally, there's no point pretending to be someone else. If you're hoping to work with this person for 3 years, you have to be who you are and trust that if it's going to be a good working relationship, that's for you being who you are. And also just, be polite. Say thank you. Thanks for your time. Don't be expecting, just be appreciative. And that goes for life, not just for when you're pitching things. So the reasons that I think this was a success for me, not just abject failure in not getting my show commissioned, is 1, I built some great connections that I can go forward with my new stories. And 2, I learned a hell of a lot about what I need to do to get a better chance next time. Obviously, I'm not writing, directing my own TV show just yet. However, I am writing, or I'm in the research stages of my first feature. I'm kind of very happy to put Sunrise Meets Sunset on the back burner. I will come back to that show when I'm in a position to do so. Whereas right now, I'm going to focus on making a feature or getting a feature commissioned that is low budget, it's achievable, it's a small cast and crew. And that will be my first chance to really show people what I can do. So even if you don't sell your idea, don't see that as like the end of the journey. It's the starting point to getting to where you want to be. That was my experience. Let me know if you've pitched or if you'd want to pitch a show to anyone. Even if you have a show, I'd love to know what people's ideas are, but also keep them to yourselves if you're worried. If you haven't already, I'd love for you to subscribe just so, I can look like I'm popular. And yeah, thanks for watching and good luck with any pitching that you have. I'll leave it there and I will see you soon.